No glory, no respect, and a 50/50th chance of dying with every bite. Welcome to the life of a royal food taster in medieval Europe, where your entire job description boiled down to, eat this and let's see if you die. Picture this. It's 1378. You're Daniel Vickers, a lowly peasant plucked from obscurity, not because of your refined palate or cooking expertise, but because your life is considered expendable enough to risk on whether the king's breakfast might contain deadly nightshade. Congratulations on your promotion. Food tasting wasn't exactly a sought-after career path in medieval courts. It was more like being the human equivalent of those canaries miners brought underground. Except instead of detecting invisible gas, you were detecting whether some disgruntled noble had decided to sprinkle a little arsenic into the royal stew. My lord, I believe this wine tastes of... Wait, is that bitter almonds? Oh dear. And just like that, another food taster's career comes to an abrupt end. The irony of the position was that kings and queens, those supposedly chosen by God to rule, lived in such constant fear of assassination that they required someone else to risk their lives with every meal. Nothing says divinely appointed ruler quite like being too afraid to eat your own lunch without a human shield. For Daniel, mornings began with a familiar knot of dread in his stomach. This wasn't pre-meal jitters. This was the daily contemplation of whether today would be his last day on earth because someone in the kitchens had a grudge against King Edward III. Rise and shine, Danny boy, jeered Jenkins, the king's guard assigned to escort Daniel to his potential death each morning. Another beautiful day of maybe dying, maybe not. The worst part wasn't even the constant fear of poison. It was the waiting. After each testing session, Daniel would be observed for hours to ensure no delayed poisons were coursing through his veins. Imagine spending 3 hours sitting in a small antechamber while nobles periodically poked their heads in to check if you were still breathing. Still alive then? Excellent. The king can have his pheasant. No, thank you. No, good job not dying. Just the momentary relief that you'd live to risk your life again at the evening meal. Here's a historical tidbit that makes the job even more absurd. Many medieval poisons had delayed effects. So even if Daniel survived the immediate tasting, he might still die slowly over the next several days. It was like playing Russian roulette, except the gun might go off hours or days after you pulled the trigger. You're looking a bit pale, Vickers, remarked Lady Joanna Lockhart, the Queen's lady-in-waiting who took perhaps too much interest in Daniel's morbid profession. Was it the king's wine or just general existential dread today? Both, my lady. The wine was sour, and my existence is increasingly questionable. Then there was the sad reality of medieval medical knowledge. If Daniel did detect poison, the court physician's idea of treatment involved such advanced techniques as bloodletting, applying leeches, or administering equally toxic antidotes that probably finished what the original poison started. Court physician. Fear not, I shall cure this poison by adding more poison. It's basic medicine, really. Daniel, I'd rather take my chances with the original poison, thank you. Court physician. Suit yourself. More leeches for my collection. Now, you might be thinking that at least royal food tasters got to enjoy the finest cuisine medieval Europe had to offer. Sure, if your definition of finest cuisine included such delicacies as heavily spiced meats to hide the taste of decay, bread with bits of stone and insects baked in from primitive milling practices, and enough garlic to keep vampires away from the entire kingdom. And the portions. Contrary to popular belief, food tasters didn't get to feast. They received the tiniest samples, just enough to detect poison but not enough to satisfy any hunger. Imagine spending your days surrounded by elaborate feasts while subsisting on what amounted to medieval tapas. Here's your daily ration, Vickers, sneered the head cook, sliding a plate with morsels so small they'd make a mouse's appetizer. Try not to enjoy it too much. Daniel's stomach growled audibly. Thank you for your generosity. I'll be sure to detect any poison in these 3 crumbs with extraordinary precision. Speaking of cooks, they absolutely despised food tasters. From their perspective, these nervous, sweaty individuals questioning their culinary creations were walking insults to their professional integrity. Many a food taster met their end not from poison but from accidental kitchen mishaps after suggesting a dish might be tainted. Sorry about that boiling oil, Vickers. Hands slipped. Funny how that keeps happening whenever you reject my dishes. Isn't it? Another delightful historical fact. Food tasters weren't just testing for conventional poisons. In an age where people believed in witchcraft and curses, they were also expected to detect magical contamination. Yes, in addition to identifying deadly nightshade or hemlock, Daniel was somehow supposed to sense if a witch had cursed the king's mutton. King, this food hasn't been hexed, has it? Daniel, I don't believe so, Your Majesty. King, you don't believe so? What am I paying you for? Daniel, you're not paying me, sire. I was conscripted. King, details. The social standing of a food taster was particularly curious. You were simultaneously vital to the monarch's survival yet considered entirely disposable. You dined at the royal table yet were treated with less respect than the royal dogs. At least the hounds got affection and weren't expected to die in service. Make way for His Majesty's walking poison detection system, announced a herald as Daniel entered the dining hall one evening. Could you not call me that? Daniel muttered. Would you prefer the king's potential corpse? I can work with that too. One particularly insulting aspect of the job was watching nobles refuse perfectly good food simply because they could. After Daniel had risked his life confirming a dish was safe, some pompous duke might send it back because it wasn't to his liking. This peacock isn't arranged in its original plumage. Take it back, barked a visiting nobleman. Daniel watched in disbelief. I nearly died tasting that. Yes, well, aesthetics are important too, peasant. During particularly tense political times, being a food taster was like being the human embodiment of international relations. When diplomats from potentially hostile kingdoms visited, Daniel's workload doubled, as every dish from foreign hands required extra scrutiny. The Spanish envoy brought these confections as gifts, explained the royal steward, pushing forward a plate of suspicious-looking sweets. Daniel sighed. Wonderful. Nothing says diplomacy like potentially poisoning the man who eats before the king. Joanna Lockhart often observed these proceedings with a mixture of horror and fascination. Do they ever give you a day off, Vickers? Daniel laughed bitterly. Yes, my lady. They're called funerals, mine specifically. Perhaps the most ridiculous aspect was that many food tasters eventually developed mild poison resistance through repeated sublethal exposure. This biological quirk meant the longer you survived as a food taster, the worse you became at your job. Imagine a profession where experience actually made you less qualified. I barely felt lightheaded after that tasting, Daniel once remarked to a fellow servant. Congratulations, replied the servant dryly. You're now terrible at the one thing keeping you alive. On the rare occasions when poison was actually detected, food tasters received no rewards or recognition for saving the monarch's life. No medal, no bonus, not even a thank you for almost dying so I didn't have to. Just the unspoken expectation that you'd be ready to do it all again tomorrow. After one such incident, the king merely nodded at Daniel's sweating, convulsing form and said, See that he recovers. I need him for dinner. By 1384, Daniel had survived longer than most in his position, a distinction that brought him no joy or advantage. His only reward for years of loyal service was an increasingly weakened constitution and a nervous twitch that developed whenever someone approached him with food. 6 years in service, mused Joanna during one of her visits to check on him after a particularly bad poisoning attempt. That must be some kind of record. Indeed, rasped Daniel, still recovering. Most of my predecessors had the good sense to die quickly. So there you have it. While knights earned glory in battle and courtiers schemed their way to wealth and power, royal food tasters earned nothing but stomach pains and the dubious honor of potentially dying before their masters. The final irony? Despite all these precautions, many monarchs throughout history were poisoned anyway. All that suffering for a security system with more holes than medieval dentistry. As Daniel often reflected in his darker moments. In this job, success means continuing to risk your life every day. Failure means you only had to do it once.